And it's Jerry Perez, who the Sierra Club has enjoyed working with. We've enjoyed working with the Angeles. We have a very smooth relationship, and we appreciate all the fine work they're doing. Jerry has a law degree, and one of the interesting things to me about him, among many things, he was a Peace Corps volunteer in Ghana in 1989 to 91, where he met his future wife. And he's worked for the United States Forest Service in a number of supervisory positions in Utah, Kentucky, and California. And he was a national litigation coordinator for the Forest Service in DC. And he worked for 5 or 6 years for the Bureau of Land Management. Close enough. There you go. And there's some intriguing stories we won't tell about that period. But he joined the Angeles National Forest in October 2018. And one of the key things that faces any supervisor of the forest is wildfire and managing fire and doing what you can. And he's going to tell a story of the most recent fire and give it some context, the Bobcat Fire. And I actually have his program on my computer. So why don't you introduce yourself, Jerry, and get going while I get your program going.
Hey, thanks, John. So again, Jerry Perez, Forest Supervisor for the Angeles National Forest. Been here about 2 years and kind of settled in the first year and the second year. It's been a busy year. We've had 5 relatively large fires on the Angeles, starting with the Rower Fire. And I'll talk about these more, the Dam Fire, the Lake Fire, and the Ranch Fire before we had the Bobcat Fire. So it's a very fire-prone forest, as many of you know. And so be walking you through kind of the events that occurred on the fire, so very fact-based orientated. So, and I'd also like to thank my Public Affairs Officer, John Clearwater, who helped put this together, as well as my Chief Garcia, who oversees the fire organization on the Angeles, Bob Garcia, for their assistance. So John, if you want to bring it up, we can start.
I will do that. I'll just take a moment here. We'll get back to the original slide. Okay.
Okay. So again, a view on a better day on the Angeles than when the Bobcat fires started. One of the premier national forests in the system, in my opinion. If you don't mind, John, we'll go to the next slide.
Okay.
So I'm going to talk about the Bobcat Fire. Started September 6th and still have things going on along the way till present. So, and we'll continue probably into the next few months, if not few years. So just kind of give an overview of it, where we're at and how things were going. Next slide, John. So the Bobcat Fire was one of the largest fires in LA County history. Rather dramatic shot. The fire from all sorts of angles, once it started, really put up a huge plume of smoke that could be seen from miles and miles away. Next slide, John.
Get down to it.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jerry. Sorry.
Thank you. No problem. So this really has been an unprecedented year for fire, for California, for the nation. On Thursday, September 10th, just to give you an idea, a few days after the Bobcat Fire started, there were 14,000 firefighters in California. We were fighting 29 wildfires, and we had already lost 2.6 million acres to the fire. So, and the resources committed to the state of California was 2,200. We had 94 assigned aircraft. And what I mean by assigned aircraft really is retardant planes and helicopters. We had 250 fire crews. Most crews are about 200 people, 219 bulldozers, and 300 water tenders. So the picture to the right really gives you an idea of the smoke that was hitting us across Western United States. And you also have to remember shortly around this time also, the state of Oregon and Washington also began to kick up wildfires. So we have limited resources nationwide, and we have a lot of resources, but it's just when you have a year like this, you begin to see them getting stretched thin. They're also required to take 2 days of rest after 14 days of work. So these folks work tremendous hours in very intense conditions. So the rest is an important part of the safety component of having firefighters out in the environment. Next slide, John. So this gives you a little bit of history on the Angeles. Those of you who've been around will remember some of these fires. The Monrovia Peak Fire was about 14,000 acres in 1954. The Gale Fire was about 25,000 acres, 1957. The Station Fire, which many of you will remember, was about 161,000 acres. And these play an event in kind of how the fire will move because of the age of the chaparral and timber in the area that burned. So Station Fire, obviously just a little over 11 years ago, the vegetation would be much younger in size compared to other areas. Also, things that we would talk about is what we call ERC's energy release component. And we do take the outlook of weather and what's coming on. And then terrain and access play a big role while we deal with fire. And as most of you know, the Angeles is very beautiful, but very unforgiving. It's straight up and straight down in many areas with very deep canyons. Next slide, John. So as mentioned, this is off one of the news releases that it was unprecedented and dangerous fire conditions within the region. On September 7th, the Angeles National Forest was closed for a week due to fire danger. That original closure was really around the where we predicted the Bobcat Fire to go. On September 9th, region-wide, as we call the state of California, all 18 national forests were closed due to fire. If you remember back to September, which doesn't seem that long ago, but feels that long ago, we had the Creek Fire, which was up on the Sierra National Forest, where a number of folks were trapped, I believe, at Mormon Lakes. We had what we call the August Fire, which would eventually affect 3 national forests and about 1 million acres. So what we were seeing was unprecedented fire across the state. And so in order to maintain resources and protect the public, it was decided that we would close all 18 national forests. And to give you an idea, this is very unprecedented to do something like this across the state. In my 30-plus career with the Forest Service, I only remember one other time, and that was during the Yellowstone fires of 1989. So that was the state of Montana. So just to give you an idea of just how unprecedented the conditions were. John, if you don't mind, next.
I just need to find it down here.
Okay. This is a graph that shows what we look at when we're thinking about fire. Fuel moisture. Fuel moisture, the lower it is, the worse it is. So you can imagine. Energy release component is really the combustion of the fire. And so we were off the charts. The gray line, which is a little bit further down from that circle, is the average for the ERC. And then the red is the maximum. And you can see that we're well above what was the maximum of any time prior to the Bobcat Fire. So conditions were all aligned in the wrong way for this fire when it took off. Next one, John, please. So the fire started on September 6th at 12:21. It was what we call, I believe, a 1 alarm fire at the time. We tried to get 5 engines in and crews in at that time, and it started by Cogswell Dam. Those of you who know the area, it's up the San Gabriel Canyon, and then you go up the west fork of the San Gabriel River. There's actually a very good road in there because it leads to the dam and the dam keeper's house, but it's a very narrow road. And so we were only able to get 3 engines in safely. And within a short period of time, there was fire on both sides of the road. The firefighters themselves were safe, but it just shows you just how really explosive the fuels were. And I live in San Dimas, and when I saw I could see the plume of smoke going up within an hour. So pretty heavy fuels and just the right conditions for things to go wrong. If you remember, September 6th was one of our hottest days. I believe the temperature got up between 110 and 115 degrees Fahrenheit. So not only were we dealing with unprecedented ERCs, moisture conditions, but we also had extremely intense temperatures at that time. So the fire itself is still under investigation, and there has been no determination yet to this date on the cause. Next slide, John. What this shows is the proximity of where the Cogswell Dam is. And so within 2 days, you can see how the fire expanded both north and south. And if you look at the southeastern corner of where the fire was at, that was about that was about where the Ranch 2 fire was, which was a fire in early August, and the dam fire, which was a fire that started in July. So that resulted in the fire moving downwards towards the community of Monrovia. Next slide, please, John. Just some ideas of the intensity of the fires on September 11th, where we were at. We were anticipating strong southeast winds at that time coming through, so Santa Ana's. We were concerned about, at that point, the community of Monrovia. Eventually, it would affect, we would be concerned about the cities of Monrovia, Duarte, Bellflower, Arcadia, and Sierra Madre, as well as evacuation warnings for the city of Pasadena at one point. So the fire was moving pretty aggressively to the southwest and was slowly kind of moving north, but not with the same intensity. So one of the things also to point out is we got very fortunate. The predicted Santa Ana winds did not come through. So we thought we had a little bit of a breather in there, and we were able to keep the fire out of the community of Monrovia. Next slide, John. So again, this just shows you just how expansive the fire was moving. The Los Angeles Times notes that it doubled in size in one day. And we got fortunate again that the Santa Ana winds that were predicted they get stuck further up the hill, did not come down the hill. So we were able to at least keep it out of the foothill communities at that point along the southern end of the forest. The other thing I want to point out is, if you all may remember, we had quite an inversion at times around this time of when this fire was going on. So a lot of clouds, a lot of cloud cover, and a lot of smoke during the day. So it limited the amount of air resources we could use at the time. So that will come up a little bit later as I kind of talk about the progression of the fire. Next slide, John. So evacuation orders were issued for Arcadia, or warnings were actually issued for Arcadia, Sierra Madre. I believe some parts of Arcadia was evacuated on the far northern end of the town, of the community, where this Big Santa Ana Canyon comes in. And then Supervisor Barger signed a proclamation at that time declaring an emergency due to the Bobcat Fire. The pictures on the left, what you see there is our morning briefings. What we would do is every morning, what we do happens is we bring in an incident management team to help manage the fire. And we have an incident commander who manages the fire. The forest actually participates if we have firefighters, but it's a very structured system. It's not that I manage the fire. We have professionals who are firefighters who understand how fire occurs, how all the different resources work together. And so we bring in these teams along the way. So we call them incident management teams, or IMTs. And we had a type 1 team, which means that's the highest level of intensity of fire. So that team came in. They had an incident command post down by Santa Fe Dam. where we had the firefighters stationed along the way. And every morning we would have a briefing as we talked about what were the projections of the fire and what we would do. Another one is just the pictures from ABC Eyewitness News talking about evacuation warnings and red flag at that time. So next slide, John. So the fire moved, did not move into the cities of Monrovia or Duarte or Bellflower, continued its march westward. And when it started moving into what we call Big Santa Anita Canyon, which is just north of the city of Arcadia. And I'll talk a little bit more later, but a lot of these fuels were like 80-year-old Chaparral, so had not seen fire for a long time, and then had moved into the canyon. As you'll see, as other slides show, really one of the big battles for the fire was up at Mount Wilson Observatory, very historic, obviously, for astrophysics, founded in 1904. And so very important kind of historical feature on the forest. And then we also have about $1 billion worth of transmission towers up there for TV, radio, and government. It really is kind of the center of all communications for Southern California. So a lot of effort went into that. And as the fire moved into Big Santa Anita Canyon, the containment went from 6% down to 3%, which is really not what we strive for. It was just that the intensity of fire continued to move upwards. There are a couple things that I think about in this firefight at Mount Wilson. It was about 5 days along the way. We had done a lot of treatment around Mount Wilson over the last 10 plus years after the station fire that helped reduce the fuels on the ground and in the area. We were able to get some back burning in early, which we call back burning, is putting fire on the ground and hoping for it to go down towards the fire to kind of meet somewhere else. And then the last thing that helped along the way, besides the firefighters who were incredible up there, was the Mount Wilson Institute. I had recently gotten a grant about a couple of years ago and had put a 530,000 gallon water tank up on the facility. So it gave us instant access to water that we would not have had if they did not have that. And so it would have meant trying to bring water up from the foothill community. So just gives you an idea. The fire did get within about 500 feet of the Mount Wilson Observatory, but did not take it out. And then the structure to the far right is the 100-inch telescope, the very historical telescope, and along the way. So tried to make sure that we could manage in that area. Next slide, John. So as you might have seen by the pictures of Mount Wilson, we felt very strong that we were going to be able to contain the fire Highway 2 until we got some winds. And so that really changed the dynamics when it got across Highway 2. The terrain is obviously very challenging on the Angeles National Forest. We can't put firefighters always right up against or near the fire for their safety, as well as making sure that they have an ability to get out quickly, and it's just hard to get into. The fuels, like I mentioned, the vegetation was 80-year-old chaparral and large timber. So the just ate up everything very slowly at first. And then we got some winds off the ocean coming west to east. And that is where, and up north, towards north, and it went towards Juniper Hills. So it jumped the lines at Highway 2 and continued through a wilderness area there and then into the Juniper Hills community. And if you have seen pictures, the winds on the north end of the forest when this occurred were pretty intense, and they were concerned if they could hold it at Highway 138. We had resources across the landscape, but you can always use more. But again, we're also competing with other fires, and that's one of the things you always want to think about is you have to think about what else is happening across the landscape, because while it's very important here, there are major fires occurring elsewhere. And then the other part that was very key on our mind was public safety. And we have a very good relationship with the local county sheriffs and the CHIPs, who really deal with the public safety component along the way. So that reduces the stress on our resources to allow them to fight fire, and they deal with the public safety component of the fire. So next slide, John. Idea of how many folks were on the fire. This is probably about peak. We had about 1,556 personnel, 187 engines. So the picture to the left is one of our engines. We had 19 hand crews, a number of what we call hotshot crews. Those are the elite of the elite of firefighters. We had 11 helicopters, 20 dozers, and 9 water tenders. And so one of the things you don't see there is, you may say, well, where was the retardant planes? And retardant planes will move from fire to fire. They cover a geographic scope. They're a national resource. So they may come over when the opportunity is right to put retardant down on the fire on the Bobcat. And then they may move north to the Creek Fire, or they might have moved east towards the El Dorado Fire. But they're a resource that moves around the area. Their ability to cover a lot of landscape is key to our success. They don't stop a fire. What they do is slow a fire. It allows us to put personnel in and try to dig in line when the retardant line is put down along ridge lines along the way. Next slide, John. As I mentioned earlier, we do strategic fire operations, and I believe this is up along the Mount Wilson Road. So at night, when conditions are cooler and there's less winds, we'll start what is either we refer to as strategic firing operations or back burning. That is putting fire on the land so that it will go down and meet the oncoming fire and reduce the amount of fuels on the landscape, hoping to maybe bring things to a slower pace and or stop the fire. So this again was part of the 5-day fight up along Mount Wilson Road, and actually went east along Highway 2 as they laid down fire there also. So a lot of good work by folks each and every night up there. Next slide, John. So kind of talked about this. The 12th, the Bobcat Fire reaches Santa Anita Canyon and Chantry Flat. Many of you have probably been to Chantry Flat. We were fortunate. We were able to get a good crew in there before the fire got there and do some burning operations. And we're able to save we did save all the facilities at Chantry Flat. Unfortunately, we also have about 80 rec residents down, what we call rec residence cabins that people enjoy on the Angeles National Forest, and they've been around for about over 100 years. And out of the 80, I think we lost about 17 cabins along the way, as well as other structures. The big thing for us was that was on the 16th was when we got the wind event. It jumped the Angeles Crest Highway, and then it entered into Juniper Hills. So that was something we had not predicted, but eventually as the winds came, we were able to pre-position firefighters along the way to help fight it. But it was also that we were stretched along the way. And so it gives you an idea of just, going all the way from pretty much Monrovia up to Juniper Hills, covering the whole stretch of the Angeles National Forest. So next slide, John. So gives you the footprint of the Bobcat Fire. This is, the red line gives you the idea of where it was at, the evacuation warnings that were going on for Altadena also. In Pasadena, we're still underneath evacuation warnings. We were able to work with the cities, like I mentioned, Monrovia, Duarte, Bellflower, Sierra Madre, Arcadia, who also provided firefighters to the incident. So we call it, when we get together and work like this, unified command. It's a very joint effort, and a very strong relationship between all the different firefighting organizations. When you're at the morning briefings that I talked about at the incident command post, you'll see firefighters from all the different agencies, as well as CHIPS. We'll also have folks from the Office of Emergency Services. We do get visits from even the Department of Public Health because of COVID, but also for serving food and all that. So you have all sorts of different entities that are engaged in a firefight. Next slide, John. Unfortunately, when it went into the community of Juniper Hills and beyond, there were 6,000 structures that were threatened. 28 were damaged and 87 were destroyed. And then other structures, outbuildings, barns and things like that, 19 were damaged and 83 were destroyed. So if you've been able to get out to the north end, you'll see just how complete some parts of the area are devastated by the fire. It's pretty much just black and not much left there right now. Next slide, John. This is a scar. And you'll have to think about places like some areas you'll see there'll be green in between. Even when you go in an area where there's fire going on, some places will have some green, other areas will have burned completely. If you look at the Mount Monrovia, right north of Arcadia, there's not much vegetation left on the mountain. It's pretty much a solid burnt area right there, as John's pointing out. So that area burned very heavy, both on the the southeast side and the southwest side and the northeast side, down towards the West Fork and then beyond. So so fire is very indiscriminate. That's the thing about it, is it'll burn in certain areas very hot and go for long stretches. In other areas, it'll burn slowly. And then when people lose homes, they'll sit there and they'll look, and they may have lost their home, but yet 3 others survived. And so it's very hard to always figure out how it works. Like I say, it's very indiscriminate, and it's how it moves across the landscape. Next slide, John. This is just some sense of kind of the burn area going on. So the station fire, again, it entered some of the station fire, but again, the fuels are a little over 10 years old, so didn't have as much fuels to burn up as maybe other parts of the forest. So in the southwestern section is really where you get to Big Santa Anita Canyon, the Mount Monrovia, and then as you move north into the West Fork of the San Gabriel River, up north, and then into Juniper Hills. So the way the fire moved across the landscape. Next one, John. So it gives you an idea of sizes of the largest fires in LA County. Station fire, again, the largest one at 161,000 or so acres. The big fire, 126,000, and then the Bobcat. And so there have been a couple others since then too, but this is one of the bigger ones along the way. Next slide, John. So really was an unprecedented year. As I mentioned, there were 5 major fires. The first one we had was at Rower Flats. It was only about 200 acres, but plus or minus, if I remember right. That's on the western end of the forest towards Santa Clarita. That happened in, I would say, late June it was. And just to give you perspective, we were getting 20 to 25 starts a week, starting around July 4th. And what I mean by start is a fire start. And our firefighters, who do a tremendous job, were able to put each of those out, and they continue through most of the fire season along the way. So it's, there are a lot more fires than the big ones that you see. Late July was the first fire that was a little bit of a tell of where the fire season was going. That was a dam fire. It was just right adjacent to the San Gabriel Canyon, about 232 acres in size, burnt pretty quickly, and then that was out put out relatively quick along the way. So that was the first fire we had. The lake fire that you see there on the northwest part of the forest, that was about second week in August, and that grew to 31,000 acres in size. So a pretty big fire at the time. The day after the lake fire, just west of the San Gabriel Canyon and west of the dam fire, we had the Ranch 2 fire, started allegedly by a homeless man right on the edge of the community of Azusa, and that was about 4,500 acres. And then that one came under containment, as well as the lake fire slowly coming under containment. The Bobcat Fire occurred. So just to give you an idea, it has been a pretty busy year for the Angeles. And as the stats show, about 23% of the forest burnt this year. So, and again, not all just all consumed, but there's been fire on the land on 23% of the landscape. Next slide, John. So, we are seeing wildlife come back in. They're pretty resilient along the way, and they do find other places to go. I'm sure we've lost wildlife during the fires. Probably the West Fork of San Gabriel was one of the more abundant wildlife habitats in Los Angeles, a beautiful area. Been able to hike up there a few times. We have biologists from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, as well as our biologists here on the Angeles, relocating some of the threatened species along the way. So you'll see the mountain-legged frog, Pacific pond turtle, Santa Ana suckers, dace, and chubs. So we are moving some of these species because where they're located now, they're in areas that will probably potentially be high likelihood of being impacted by debris flows. Next slide, John. Thank you. So this gives you an idea of the potential for debris flow across the landscape. The darker the color, the higher likelihood. This is produced by USGS along the way. And so you can find this on their website of what would be the likelihood of debris flow, depending on the amount of rain that we get. For those who may remember, during the station fire, the next year or two afterwards, my understanding was some of the wettest years, and there were some pretty heavy landslides across the landscape, to the point where Highway 2 was actually closed for 2 years, just above the Crest Station area. So that was one area, but this is something that we're looking at very heavily, what will be the impacts. And so we're also working with the Department of Public Works, who manages the reservoirs located across the Angeles, built specifically, most of them, for this kind of event, in case there is a debris flow and sediment along the way. So next slide, John. And I think that's the final one. The few things this might have been, okay, so I think I know what's on this slide, but it's not coming up. So this is kind of what's happening now. So right now there is a closure order that encompasses a majority of the, some reason not come across, but I do remember it, John. So the majority of the Bobcat Fire area, the perimeter, is closed to public access. There are a couple of reasons why we do that. One is public safety. If you see some of the areas that have been burnt, we get this dry ravel that comes down. So there are trails right now that are pretty much obliterated. And so they're very unsafe to travel on. So for public safety, we don't want people in there. The other thing is we want to give the land a chance to heal, and the ability to kind of come back in a more natural way without a lot of people on the landscape. So the closure order goes through April of 2022. And I can always adjust that closure order depending on conditions and what happens next. And then The other part of the slide talks about, monitoring for debris flows, because there's not a lot we can do if we get a heavy rain and some of this land starts moving across the landscape. So it's a lot is happening. The last thing I'll say is, one of the questions I was asked is, this is very impactful to employees of the Angelus, as well as many of you who enjoy the Angelus and have helped us along the way, building trails, helping taking care of things. We've lost a lot of things that people have put their life's work into. And so how do we move forward? So there's going to be a lot of work that will be done over the course of the next few years. We have money coming in for what we call burnt area emergency response, some really quick work along the way. And we're seeking additional funding to continue the good work. But so for the employees, it's a big shift in the work for them, as well as probably seeing some of the work of their careers kind of evaporate by the fire. For the public, it's even more so that way too. People have lost homes, they've lost cabins. We were fortunate we did not lose any individuals. All of the firefighters, we had a few minor injuries, so I felt very fortunate for that, and given what we were dealing with. So it's a testament to the good work of our firefighters and the cooperation with all of our local partners, the fire departments, the local sheriff's departments, the CHIPs, and many others who really work with us day in, day out. So with that, John and Don, I want to thank you for the opportunity to kind of give this presentation, and I'll look forward to any questions afterwards.
So we will come back to you then at the end, and we'll probably have 20 or 30 minutes for questions. And I would like to, in a minute, introduce the new program chair for the Forest Committee, but she's not on video yet, so we'll come back to my friend Juana Torres in a minute. So what we're going to do now is introduce Mr. Rick Halsey, an old friend of the Sierra Club and the Forest Committee. We've worked with him for something, it seems like 2 decades. And he is the president of the Chaparral Institute that includes naturalists, scientists, and wild and firefighters. And I know Rick will tell you about the fire training he got. And he's an educator who values chaparral, the drought-resistant woody shrubs that cover much of Southern California and the interior mountain slopes. Was shrubs okay to say, Rick?
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, wanted to make sure. As a valuable resource and a place to enjoy wilderness, it aims to protect the California this unique California ecosystem through public education and legal action. He's a photographer. He studied at UC Santa Barbara and San Diego State. He taught biology, I think, was it high school or junior
Sure.
high?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, for 2 decades. And the second edition of his book, which is terrific, Fire, Chaparral, and Survival in Southern California, was published in 2008. And if there is anyone that could be called Mr. Chaparral, it's our friend Rick Halsey.
Well, thanks, John, and thanks, Jerry, for your contribution here. I just want to welcome everybody here. I've been in the Sierra Club for a while. I always like to ask, how long have you been in the Sierra Club? And does anybody beat 47 years?
No.
Okay, I joined when I was in high school, so I always like to point that out.
Yeah.
And I jumped into the life membership and it was still affordable. So I don't even know if you give those anymore, do you?
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, so Sierra Club's been part of my life for a long time, and it's really an honor to be here. I want to talk about the Bobcat Fire in a little different way here. There's really 2 stories that are going on. One is the human dynamic, which is catastrophic for those who lost those cabins, and especially for the nature center out at Devil's Punch Bowl. I don't know if you're familiar with that. We're going to talk about that in a moment. That's the catastrophe part of what happened in the Bobcat Fire. But ecologically speaking, for the most part anyway, this fire was perfectly fine. The chaparral system is going to come back wonderfully. In fact, if you want to renew your hope and be inspired by nature, I would go out as soon as the forest is open after the rains, and it's going to explode with wonderful life. And and you'll see things you've never seen out there because of the fire effects and the things that stimulate post-fire regeneration. So I encourage you to get out there and keep your eye open for things you've never seen before. So it's really a remarkable experience once you kind of get that mindset and realize, even though it's hard to see blackened ground, especially areas where you've loved to go and it's not the same anymore, you need to really focus on what nature's doing to continue its process. And it's not a renewal, it's actually just part of the process in the Chaparral. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit, and I'll open up my PowerPoint here. And let's see, I guess I need to share this, don't I?
Yes, you do.
Okay, well, we'll do that. There we go. And then we'll start from the beginning. How's that, everybody? Good? All right. So oops. Are you seeing the full screen, John, or is it?
You need to go to from the beginning. Let's see. Yeah.
Back again. Okay.
For you. Yeah.
All right, well, good. So for those of you who aren't familiar, this is the view from the Nature Center at Devil's Punch Bowl. And it's really a remarkable place. It's the ecosystem primarily is pinyon pine woodland with a chaparral understory. You've got some coulter pines near the top and some white fir up there. But for the most part, it's a chaparral dominated ecosystem. And what you see here, some fabulous geology, a few trees, but the domination of shrubs is really the main picture here. And what I want to do is I want to talk about the Nature Center for a moment, if you hadn't had a chance to go there. I'd never been there before, and this is what it used to look like. It unfortunately burned down. This is one of the catastrophic components of this fire. This place, I don't know when it was built, but it was a throwback from a long time ago, and there's a little sign on the door there. It says Nature Center now open. So I visited this place a couple of years ago, and I walked in, and I don't know if you're familiar with visitor centers, but usually somebody will greet you and go on with their business. So I walked into this building with a friend of mine, and there was this guy there with his ranger hat, and he looked at both of us, and he said, "Welcome." And I was kind of shocked because, you kind of want to be anonymous when you go into these public places. And he said, "So, do you know what's in this tree log here?" And so, well, I didn't know. So we went over and took a look. You can see that thing right below the little Bobcat. And he took this pointer out of his pocket, just snapped it, if you can imagine. And he started whacking this trunk, and he says, "What do you see in there?" And of course, it's a beehive. And he's looking at us and he's smiling. He's got this incredibly infectious smile. And he says, "How do you think the bees got in there?" Now, I want you to understand something. He never told us anything. All he was doing was asking questions and deriving the information from our own insights. And that's the mark of a true teacher. So, of course, we kind of looked in the back, and there was a pipe that went outside. And that was kind of fun. So, but he wasn't done there. What he did was he took his flashlight, which was also in his other pocket, tapped this little cylinder. He said, "What do you see those? What do you see in there?" And you look closely, and inside were these little honeypot ants, which are native to the area, which I'd never seen other than a National Geographic special. These ants collect honey where they actually make it, and they put it in their abdomens, and they hang from the ceiling. And that's how they store the food. And the interesting thing is that he goes, "Look at the counter." And he tapped the counter down below. And he said, "What do you see?" And there was dirt on the counter. He says, "You're probably thinking I'm not a very good housekeeper, but that's not true. How do you think the dirt got there?" And so he stumped us there. And he said, "Well, these ants at night after I leave, look at the top." And sure enough, the opening to the little container there was open. He says, "They sneak out of here at night, roam the Nature Center all night long and collect things." And I came in early one day, and they had captured a moth, and they were dragging it up the bark. So this gentleman's name is Dave Newmer, and he is actually one of the rangers that was in that particular nature center for quite a long time. He seemed to know so much. And I said, well, how long have you been here? He's been there for 40 plus years. So this man has been inspiring people to enjoy nature and love their surroundings in a way that I've never experienced before. So unfortunately, the nature center is not there anymore. I'm hopeful that the county parks will rebuild it. But this is one of the stories that you focus in on when you go to these natural areas sometimes, not necessarily about the nature, but it's about the people that inspire you to love it. Okay, so I'm having a little difficulty here with my PowerPoint. It doesn't seem to want to. I'm going to reshare again here, John, okay?
Okay, sure. We've got plenty of time.
Okay.
And it is fun to see while you're getting that going, how many people I know on the in the audience. So hello.
Yeah. This technology is such a wonderful thing. Okay, we'll try it again. All right, here we go. Do you see it?
We see the slide you just showed.
Okay.
There you go.
All right, here we go. All right, good. So we left the visitor center that day, and we talked to a few of Dave's friends out there. This is one of the ravens up in the Pinyon Pine. Anyway, and we were talking to him, and he kept talking to us about the crow, about the raven, and told us the difference between crows and ravens. And he said, see that little house over to the right, and there was a little home to the right of this tree. He says, you know what that there's for? And I go, well, I don't know. It looks like a house. He said, who do you think lived there? I said, well, you? He says, yeah, I lived there before I first started. So anyway, I just want to share the magic of this story because there's so many things in the Angeles National Forest that people don't really realize because they go to the same place all the time and they don't really, change their patterns. And it's just something you might want to do. So let's talk about the chaparral and exactly what goes on out there. So chaparral in particular, it's characterized by three basic things. And I want you to think about if you were going to describe chaparral or this shrubland community that was in the Angeles National Forest, how would you characterize it? Just think about it for a minute. Had to come up with three things. How would you characterize chaparral? Okay, time's up. So
Actually,
typically,
they can't hear you. I mean, they can't answer you.
I know that.
Oh, it's rhetorical.
It's just rhetorical. So most people realize we're in a Mediterranean type climate, which is hot, dry summers, mild, wet winters. And the shrubs that are out there are drought hardy, otherwise they wouldn't survive. And then there's a relationship with fires, those three things: the climate, the types of shrubs and the animals that live there, of course, and then the fire relationship. So you know what, John, I'm getting the waiting room here, and it's interfering in my ability to.
Well, we're still seeing the slide.
Yeah, but I can't advance it anymore. Here we go.
I do not know.
What's that?
I have never seen that happen before.
Okay, let's try it again. Okay. Can you see my slide now?
Yeah, you just need to go from the beginning again.
Okay,
Or
there we
from the
go.
current slide. Yeah.
All right, so drought hardy shrubs, Mediterranean type climate, and infrequent wildfire. And I want to emphasize this infrequent thing. Fire, as long as it appears like no more than about once per 30 years, we're in good shape. And I want to emphasize the fact that, a lot of the commentary about the Bobcat Fire addressed, and Jerry mentioned this, how there hadn't been much fire history and the area hadn't burned in quite a while. And when you hear this on the news media, it's often said in a sort of a derogatory way. It hasn't burned in so long. Well, that's a very good thing. And in fact, I'm very happy that the fire hadn't been there for such a long time, because what that means is the fire is going to be a naturally high intensity fire of the type that the chaparral really thrives under. And it may sound counterintuitive, but the hotter the fire in chaparral, essentially the better it is, because it scarifies the seeds to germinate properly, gets rid of any invasive weeds that may be there, and just gets the system ready for its own particular patterns. So that's a good thing. And it's not necessarily what you hear oftentimes. So if you take a look at the map, you'll see chaparral is basically throughout the entire state. It's in every single county. And it's actually should be the state ecosystem, but that's a whole different story. There's the Angeles National Forest. So what's the problem with the name? As you see, I just crossed out the word forest. It really ought to be called Angeles National Chaparral Recreation Area, because about 72% of the Angeles National Forest is chaparral. That's more than 500,000 acres. And, people go to see the forest and they want to know where the trees, so much of the forest isn't trees. And so that's really what you're celebrating in the national forest. It's, I guess if you wanted to maintain the word forest, it's kind of an elephant forest. And the diversity of chaparral is pretty remarkable. There's all sorts of different kinds. It's not all the same. There's basically 11 main types that I've come up with. This is maritime chaparral. If you recognize the picture, you'll see that big rock. That's Morro Bay. The chaparral at Devil's Punch Bowl was mixed chaparral because it has all sorts of different kinds. So that's what they had out there. And depending on where you go, the first 6 there are basically defined by the type of vegetation. The next 4 there are defined by the location. And serpentine, the last one, is actually named for the California state rock, which is serpentine. And chaparral loves serpentine soils, mostly in Northern California. Most plants can't stand it. Chaparral has an ability to live where nothing else does. So animal-wise in the chaparral, and these creatures roamed all over Devil's Punch Bowl at one point. It's a California grizzly bear. It's on the flag. The reason it's on the flag is because it dominated this state. When the Spanish came here, they brought their cattle and it caused the grizzly bear population to explode. There were 10 or 20 in a pack roaming around. Unfortunately, the last one in Southern California was killed in 1908 in the San Gabriel Mountains, and there she is. The last one in California was seen in 1928 in the sequoias. So we don't really know what ecological role these animals had, but it must have been significant. And it's sort of a message to all of us to protect what we've got left. So let's get back to the fire story. By the way, this little tunnel here is very similar to what the grizzly bear would have done in the chaparral. They'd make these tunnels with these trails where they'd put their same paw print in the same hole generation after generation. So you'd see this kind of pockmarked trail. But anyway, this is the kind of thing you would have seen throughout the whole ecosystem. So what happens when chaparral burns? Well, this is that site. This is behind my house, actually. Got burned in a 2007 Witch Creek fire in San Diego County. That's my son. He resprouted actually from the fire. You can see what he did. He got a little bigger. Let's go back for a second. So just take a look at this scene and then take a look at that. So how does that make you feel? If you ignore the boy there for a second. I mean, it looks like a devastated landscape. People will say that. But in fact, this is exactly the way the chaparral should look after a fire. Basically, nothing's left. And descriptions like moonscape or whatever, that you hear this all the time, like it's a horrible event. Well, what would have been horrible is if there had been a lot of weeds in here. The area had burned multiple times over the last couple of decades, and the fire wasn't hot at all. This is what you want to see. And this is a recovery photo of the Thomas Fire area that burned a little bit before the Bobcat Fire a couple of years ago. And it's doing a remarkable job coming back. In fact, this is the same place in the 1930s that was recovering after a fire then. So this has been an ongoing process that's been occurring for thousands of years, if not millions. And the system bounces back really well if the fire frequency is below 30 years. If you get more fires, you've got a problem. And this is what we're really dealing with much of Southern California. The story is too many fires means no chaparral. So this whole area got burned in 1970. The middle section got burned in 2001. And the lower portion there got burned in 2003. This is San Diego County. The fires I'm talking about are the Laguna Fire, the Viejas Fire, and the Cedar Fire. What do you notice in the right-hand corner? Okay, you notice the area that got burned within 2 years of the last fire, and it's not coming back very well. Basically, it's being consumed by weeds. And this is what you see in the front country all over the San Gabriel Mountains down below the lower elevations. You see it on the road going up the Lake Arrowhead. These weeds are crawling up the slope because there's just too many fires. So fires occurring less than 15 to 20 years apart guarantee that you're going to reduce the biodiversity. You're going to get a lot of weedy grasslands, and actually that increases the fire risk. So I like to say less than 30 years, you're asking for trouble. Under 15 to 20, you've guaranteed it. So this is a picture of the fire permit you've already seen of the Bobcat Fire. And I think my cursor is working here, but if you take a look, this is where the Nature Center was actually up at the top that was lost. But this area here, the majority of the Bobcat Fire, ecologically speaking, we're okay. I know it's devastating to lose the trees and the things that have happened there, but if we're patient enough, if we allow the system to come back on its own, things will be fine. The problems occur when people want to go in and fix things right away. And we just have to take a deep breath and let this system recover on its own, not disturb the soil, just let it come back. As difficult as it may be, trying to do something actually can cause some problems. Now, the area that's going to have a problem is this little area here. This is about 5,000 acres where the Bobcat Fire moved into the station fire. Can you see my cursor, John?
Yes.
Okay, so the station fire, when was that? That was 2009. Okay, so you've got about 10 years here since the last fire. That's just not enough time. So the challenge for the Forest Service now is to try to make sure that doesn't burn again, and also to keep fire out of here for at least 15 to 20 years at the minimum. And that's going to be a challenge because, as you can see, even though this is only 10-year-old recovering pyrogenic habitat, it still can carry a fire under the right conditions. So that spot's in trouble. So that's where we might want to go in there and do some mitigation in terms of controlling the invasive weeds that are probably going to take off there. So it's, never one story, it's multiple stories. So I just want to end this thing with a little picture of hope. This is another picture of the Thomas Fire, which, in case you didn't know, was up in Ventura and Santa Barbara County a couple of years ago. But this area looks pretty, devastated. There's some greenery, but I just want you to remove that word devastation from the ecological view of things. I mean, devastation belongs with homes and lives that are lost, but not nature, as long as the fire regime's proper. So take a look what happened a few months later. This area just got covered with poodle log bush. It's just incredibly beautiful. And the flowers that come out of these things, these are Humboldt lilies. You don't see these things like this until after fires. So like I said before, get up into the Bobcat Fire once the forest is open again. Oh, excuse me, the National Shrubland is opened again. And just explore and rejoice in the pyrogenic habitat that will bring some things that you've never seen before. And it isn't just about plants. There's going to be a whole succession of bird species over the next decade that you've never seen before. One of the interesting post-fire birds is the lazuli bunting. It's a beautifully colored bird. You ought to look it up in the bird book. And you'll start seeing those the first couple of years, then they'll disappear again. So animals go through succession processes too. This is kind of a fun photo of before and after that same area. Sort of gives you a transition. So, these systems are pretty resilient as long as they're not burning too frequently. So I want to leave you with this. You can go out in nature and see a lot of different things, but she's really an incomparable guide if you know how to follow her. And it's so difficult for us to get out of our human heads and understand nature for what it is rather than what we want it to be. And to be informed really provides you opportunities to see things you can't see otherwise. So I urge you to look up the research about Chaparral, and we've got a website that's got a lot of great pictures and papers you can read. It's the CaliforniaChaparral.org website. I want you to think about this for a minute. How many P's in Chaparral? Okay, how many R's? Have you committed? All right. 1 P, 2 R's. If you forget anything, don't forget that. So I just want to touch on, John, how long have we got here?
You got another 6 or 7 minutes before we go to questions?
So the climate change issue, I just wanted to touch on really quick. This is a graph produced by some colleagues of mine in University of Arizona, Tucson, in Flagstaff, I believe, Tucson, excuse me. And what they did is they got tree rings, and they measured the tree ring widths, and that's a pretty good proxy for the amount of moisture, in the environment. This is 1,000 years of time. The red line is basically sort of a averaged of the tree ring sizes based on what they think the drought was doing at the time. And as you can see, the droughts are pretty common. Wet periods are pretty common. And this is based on an index based on the tree ring width. So if that kind of makes sense to you. But what I want to point out is this period here around the late 1500s, that this is the worst drought that we'd had in 1,000 years. This down here is the drought we had in the year 2000. So just to put into context, this killed a lot of plants, which created a lot of vegetation that was pretty flammable. And that's partially responsible for the fires we're seeing today. Now, these were pine tree studies that were done, but they've done a comparable study with oaks in California, and they've come up with the same graph. So this is a pretty interesting dynamic. So what I want to do now is look to the future, where that blue arrow is. So this is the previous picture, and the little arrowed area there on the right is the period I'm going to focus on. This is the concentrated area. I just magnified it a little bit. We're a little further to the right now because it's almost, well, it is 2020, isn't it? I've lost track of time. So what's the prediction? Well, here's what it is looking like over the next 100 years. And I want you to understand that we're in a predicted wet period right now, and it's probably going to last for a few years. And this was predicted 5 years ago that we'd have this. So we're probably going to have a good couple of rainy years, and then all of a sudden we're in trouble if the predictions are accurate. That green line was the extreme drought that we had back over the last 1,000 years. By 2050, that's going to be the mean. Oops, excuse me. So as you are looking to the future, what you've got to realize, we've got to plan for what's coming, not what used to be. And we have a very hard time doing that. So I've had a discussion with folks up in Northern California, and I don't know whether you know about this historical, what do you call it? Sort of schism between North and South. But whenever I've gone up there and talked about Chaparral and fire, they all kind of, first of all, once they realize I'm from LA, they give me that look. And then they discount everything I'm saying because, well, we don't have the same problems you people have in Southern California. And what I tell them, I says, look, this was 10 years ago. I said, you've got to look forward and think about what's going to happen rather than what is happening. And I'm going to tell you something that you're not going to like. Southern California is heading to San Francisco, fire-wise. And of course, that really upsets people from the Bay Area. Well, guess what's happened the last few years? I mean, they've got fires now up there like we used to get we've had for 20 years. And there's a fire in particular, I forget what it was called. It burned around Lake Berryessa, which was east of Santa Rosa. Anyway, it reburned Chaparral that had burned 5 years before. So they're getting the same dynamic. And so they're talking about prescribed burns and all of this in the Chaparral. And I'm saying, look, you don't need to add any more fire to the landscape up there because you're already going to get it. And they still haven't gotten that picture. We have down here for the most part. But again, we have to remind people to look to the future. And what I want to close with is that's a great dynamic to think about for you, again, when you go into the Bobcat Fire and look at the remarkable restorational process that's going on in the next couple of years, and just enjoy nature at its very best. So any questions?
What I'm going to do is let's take, there will be a lot of questions, I'm guessing.
Oh, that's great.
Let's take a 1 minute break. And I think, Rob, did you have something you wanted to mention that you forgot to mention? If you did, we'll unmute you. And then I want to introduce Juana Torres, if she can unmute herself. Let me get Juana again. There you are.
Thank you, John. I think I just forgot one important thing to mention. It's for more information about the work that we're doing and also to sign a petition right now, please go to our Nature for All Coalition's website, lanatureforall.org. You'll find out more about the work that the Sierra Club is supporting and also that the work, all of the work that the coalition is doing. So thank you, John.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I'd like to introduce Juana Torres, who's our new program chair, an old friend of mine, an old colleague. Do you want to say hello, Juana?
I do, thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Juana Torres, and I'm really excited to be rejoining the Forest Committee and be back on the team. I'm a longtime San Gabriel Mountains organizer, supporter, public lands gal, and just really excited to be here tonight with all of you. And I look forward to a much better 2021 and to working with you for the protection of the San Gabriels. So thank you.
Thank you, Juan. And I assume 2021 can only be better.
I sure hope so.
Thank you. So what we're going to do is, let's see here how we can ask people who have questions. I can unmute you selectively. So I don't see the place that I normally see to raise hands. So let me see where that went. Not sure where it went. But let's do this. I'm going to kind of scroll through this, and Jenny, you look like you might have a toothache there. I don't know. Is that? So does anyone have? If you wave at me, I'll try and. Karen, you had a question. I know. So let's start with you. And I will ask you to unmute, and then you should be able to ask a question. I inadvertently, I think, unmuted Jenny. Karen. So I'm asking you to unmute, and there you are.
There we go. Okay. Hello. A great program. Thank you. A couple of things, but you kind of started to answer my question that I typed to John about control burning. You hear so much buzz that we need to do more control burning, and we had a commander-in-chief that wanted us to rake our forests and do all these invasive things. And how do we educate the media and our legislatures about how to let forests manage themselves and the good of fire?
So I'll start, and by all means, Rick, you can jump in. So one of the challenges we face is, when John talks about the landscape and how we manage it, it's much easier when there isn't the urban interface. That's what creates the real challenges for us as an agency, is more and more folks are moving right up against the forest. And thus there's expectations around making sure that we treat the landscape. And so Mount Wilson's a great example where we did do a lot of treatment up there over the last 10 years. And it is felt by the firefighters that it's one of the things that helped save Mount Wilson. Can we do it everywhere? No, the cost is prohibitive. Angeles does about 4,000 acres of fuels treatment a year. So it's not tremendous, but we try to put it in the right places and in the right areas to help us kind of help manage the wildfire also. You have to realize Angeles, the Cleveland, the San Bernardino, and the Los Padres are full suppression forests. So what that means is we go right at it. We don't manage fire, allow fire to go across the landscape unless it chooses to, like the Bobcat Fire. And that's because of that 17 million people in our backyard. When we had the evacuation orders for Pasadena, we're talking about 300,000 people. So it's a complicated answer. It's not one or all. It's where do we put it and how do we do it effectively to deal with all the folks who want to live right next to the beautiful Angeles or any other national forest. Rick, if you want to join in.
Rick, oh, I think you're muted.
Okay. Yeah. So the question is, how can we manage the fires or the forests? What you want to synthesize that down really quickly to what you precisely want to know.
Karen,
Oh, she's.
you're
Yeah.
muted again. I don't know why. I wanted
There we
to
go.
ask you to mute.
There you go, Karen.
I muted myself again. I understand that we need to protect structures, and thank goodness Monrovia voted to purchase its hills to save them from further development up the hills, because that would have been catastrophic. And I see it, like where structures are, it doesn't get a chance to naturally act the way Chaparral is supposed to act. So it's a great case for not allowing development up in the hills. But I've had a complete metamorphosis with fire. I mean, I used to think of Bambi and the devastation and all that, and then now I see it as a genesis, a rebirth.
Right.
The wildflowers and the birds that go in, and I love the before and after pictures. I've been up in Monrovia Canyon taking pictures already. It's amazing how fast the laurel sumac is crown sprouting, and it is just seems like it's a really difficult thing to get people to just let it be, and then they yell at their legislatures to do something, you know, and that's, you know, we have the air power because people want fires out immediately, and there's a lot of pressure on legislatures to stop fires. And so I was actually really happy to see the Bobcat Fire burn, and there was parts of Monrovia up in the clamshell area that I was really bummed out that it didn't burn, because it's full of the tree of heaven and the fountain grass. It's like, darn, all the good stuff burned and the yucky stuff is still there.
Rick,
let me jump in.
You have a thought, Rick?
Jump in there.
Yeah.
So the problem with the tree of heaven and all these other invasive plants, the fire at that juncture just won't get hot enough, and all it does is ends up spreading those even more. And that's the problem with these things. You know, and in terms of you know, what the Forest Service can do to control these things, yeah, they're under a tremendous amount of political pressure. Jerry can, I probably don't want to touch on this too much, but I mean, the station fire, they got hammered which way from Sunday by the AP, the Associated Press, and everybody else saying, you know, it was their fault the station fire happened. If they'd just been doing their prescribed burns, you know, that this wouldn't have happened. Well, that's just not true. I mean, the prescribed burns and the treatments they were going to do were nowhere near where the fire started. And it, you know, it had to do with multiple issues other than that. And the notion we're going to be able to, you know, somehow magically transform the landscape so there's no fires. There have been mega fires for thousands of years. The problem is we're putting houses and homes in the way, and everybody's upset about, you know, why their homes burn. And the Monrovia has done a remarkably creative thing with their purchase of the landscapes there. And that's exactly what other communities should do. Realize you live in a fire-prone environment, like Jerry said, adapt your community to survive that, which we can, and then let nature do its thing in the wildlands. The notion that we're going to be able to stop big fires, I mean, they're inevitable. They're just going to happen, especially with climate change. And we have to give firefighters a break and don't expect them to do the impossible. What we can do is look in the mirror and say, what can we do to protect our homes so we don't put firefighters at risk?
And that what you just said is the theme of our January program. Is, you know, how can we cope with fire? And, you know, that includes both zoning and hardening homes and a lot of other things. But nature's problem is we put all sorts of flammable things right next to it.
Yeah.
And then complain. But now that the homes are there, you got to do something. So it is a deep and interesting problem. So let's see, we had another question here. Go ahead. Let me. Bowden, I'm trying to get you unmuted there.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Great, great. My question is for both Rick and Forest Supervisor Perez. I think so many people depend on the Angeles Forest now for recreation, and there's a huge demand. So another problem I see is the fact that, well, the fires are natural. I'm not trying to dispute that at all. What happens when these fires occur and then a huge section of the forest has to be closed, it seems like another problem that happens is there's more pressure put on the remaining open areas of the forest. And I think particularly now there's been a huge increase in the number of people using the forest because of the pandemic. When we first had our closures earlier in the year, Chantry Flats was swamped, Eaton Canyon, where I work as a volunteer, not now because of the pandemic, but was working as a volunteer earlier. So I'm just wondering what kind of ideas you guys have or plans, or what can be done to disperse people, help the forest, but still allow recreation.
So I'll start. So you're right. And your name again was?
Bodan.
Bodan? So you're right.
Yes.
Okay, Bodan. So we got hammered this year. Angeles is a very busy forest on a lot of weekends. We tend to get pretty quiet weekdays, but COVID really has changed the dynamic of user use. And it's not just Angeles, like every national forest was feeling this pressure of tremendous visitor use. I can think of the San Gabriel Canyon. We pulled, we're pulling over like 20 tons of trash out of there, where historically maybe it would have been about 8 tons, probably if not more. So the challenges we face is we have users who have never been to a national forest. It's not like they're bad people. They just don't understand a national forest. They might think of a county park, and they can take their trash and there's a trash can. We have trash cans out. I have a trash truck, actually, one of the only trash truck in the Forest Service system because we have so much trash. And so it's like, how do we educate folks? And then we see the user groups. It's not just the weekday ends that are now the busy days. It's every day is busy. So, we're talking like regionally, like what do we do differently? How do we educate folks? Because, national forests aren't national parks. We have limitations on like how we can control folks, but Chantry is a great example. It gets overused and it's a safety problem along the way of, we had a fire up there earlier in July, about 7 acres, and it was mass pandemonium. And we were fortunate to have a few folks that live up there and work up there, and they were able to get people out safely, but it was very difficult for the city of Sierra Madre to get their engine up there. And then we had other folks, and so you got the conflict happening. So we're trying to look at how do we manage like those places like Chantry on a more controlled basis. But it's not easy to do. Politically, it has issues because, folks want, the constituents call and folks say, well, I want you to go up there. If you're at Eaton Canyon, you face the same thing, trying to manage people in and out. So it's a difficult dilemma. But the other side is, it's great if we can educate these folks what national forests are and what they contribute to the greater LA basin. I think like 17% of all the water for the LA basin comes off the Angeles National Forest. So there's, ecosystem services, as we call them, that come off the Angeles. The Angeles, we have the Adventure Pass. So people, if they purchase it, we can do a lot more to give them a better product. So it's going to take, it's a whole new dynamic. And, how do we deal with that, that user base? And will it be a blip? And next year, people forget about us, except for the ones who remember us. They say RV sales are up 700 to 800%. And since the pandemic, I own one, but I bought it years ago. But the point being is, in 2 years from now, people are going to say, what am I paying insurance on? I have to pay storage fees, and we don't use it that much. So part of it is how do we see what the adjustments are? But we're talking about it regionally because it's not just an Angeles problem. It's just that the Angeles everything is much more exponential on the Angeles because there's so many people, and so many people. There's anything that people can think of, they've tried on the Angeles. That's for sure.
One thing, Jerry, I would mention is that the Sierra Club, for example, has been involved for a decade and a half, stimulating, let us say, the project that's hopefully going to be developed along East Fork, north of let's see, Santa Anita Canyon, and above, gosh, what's the city? The 39 is. I'm blanking. But on the East Fork and the West Fork, so there's actually plans for a project. And the idea there is to redesign recreation and visitor information. Because, for instance, there's a lot of trash sometimes in East Fork. A lot of people come on weekends. And Todd was talking to a staffer about 8 years ago, and he said, well, we didn't have a problem that one summer that we had $10,000 to give people trash bags. And so what they did is they asked people to take their trash out, and they gave them trash bags. Guess what happened? People put their trash in the trash bags and then, put it by the trash. I mean, it just took a simple example of actually giving, people go out, they don't think, oh, I've got to bring a trash bag. So strange as that may sound. So a little stimulation can really change people's behavior. And the second point I just want to make before we get back to Rick is the Forest Service budget in the last 20 years, maybe since the Reagan era, at least since 1990s, has stayed flat as inflation's gone up. Maybe I'm being optimistic, but the staffing compared to the number of people just keeps going down. And that's something that, I don't know, Jerry can't talk about it politically, but that's something that we can talk about. So funding for national parks, national forests, Bureau of Land Management is insufficient.
Yeah, I'll echo what John said. The Forest Service actually needs money to do what it's supposed to do. I mean, almost all of it's now siphoned off to fire, and the Forest Service has become more of a fire department than anything else. And so the money they used to do for education, naturalist work, that kind of thing, it's just gone. So, I think there really ought to be an effort to try to convince Congress to fund that component of the Forest Service, not just send it there, but say, look, we need the public to understand these beautiful resources. And the only way you can do it is to pay people to help people understand it. So it's really about money.
Well, back to fire. Do we have any additional questions? And if you want to be there, okay, well, I see a hand going up, so I'll unmute you, Andrew. But you can also put it in chat, and I will. And so I'm asking you to unmute, Andrew, and there you are.
Yes, I was wondering from Jerry, with what you learned about protecting Mount Wilson, whether you guys can put that together in a manual for the areas beneath the Angeles forests that we border on. We have some areas of the wildlife urban interface, and what you've learned from Mount Wilson would be very helpful if it was codified someplace.
We're talking about trying to look at how we might be able to demonstrate some of the things we've learned. So we've kind of explored that, whether it's through video or some sort of book or whatever. So we are kind of looking at what we can do. It'd be both Mount Wilson and beyond, but Mount Wilson was unique along the way because right between Mount Wilson and Mount Harvard was the key point where if we'd lost that part, it would have been down to the city of Pasadena. So that's much more rugged terrain along the way. So that was a different part of the firefight, but we are looking at what we can put together.
Yeah, because in trying to deal with the area where I live on Sphinx Canyon, it's amazing how much misinformation you get from people. And when you guys have the expertise, it'd be really nice if it were codified someplace.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing I didn't hear you mention is you mentioned nothing about the alert wildfire cameras and whether they're helpful to you or not.
Oh, yeah.
They are.
I'm sorry, I'm a biased person. I'm the only private individual I've been told that has 3 wildfire cameras on the Alert Wildfire Network. So I'm pushing my own button. So I'll be honest.
Yeah. Well, appreciate the honesty. Yes, my Chief Garcia, Fire Chief Bob Garcia, he's pointed to a couple of places where it's really come in handy. And so they are tremendous tools to give us another advantage in our full suppression kind of mode that we're in. So they have come in pretty handy. I know there was a fire up above Wrightwood that was caught by one of those cameras. I think that was last year or maybe I think like last fall, but they are being used and are showing where some of the fires are occurring early on.
Yeah, it turned out that the 2 cameras that I have, they were used for monitoring the Bobcat fire. So they weren't helpful in finding when it started, but they were actually used a lot for monitoring.
Right. And that's what we've used them to along the way. So
let's close with a few questions that I've missed here that I'm catching up on that were asked in chat. Let's see here. From a friend of ours, Gary K. This is a provocative one. Why not tax homeowners living on the edge of fire-prone areas to pay for the mitigation of the nearby fire danger?
The nearby what?
Fire danger, meaning essentially you're asking people that are who are getting. I mean, in a sense, we spend, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but we're spending an inordinate amount of money defending homeowners in the wild and urban interface. And the proposals like this have gone up and down and then away for years, and you can understand why they would go away.
Well, yeah, it's never going to happen.
Yeah.
Because it's a great idea, and we should internalize costs, not externalize them. I mean, this has been going on since the beginning of the Republic. I mean, private interests love to externalize their costs, so all of us pay for it. And at some point, it's okay. You know, you kind of broad base the insurance premiums and that kind of thing. But when it comes to public services, a lot of the money that we spend is really focused on just a handful of people to protect them. And, you know, I don't see that ever changing because the people who kind of run the show are the ones that are protected by that. So not to put a, light hand on it, but anyway.
I'll try to get back to Gary, but the Don Bremer, did you have a question? I can unmute you there.
I did, John. And this is for Jerry. Jerry, given how complex the Bobcat fire was, along with all the other fires, is there any way that the Forest Service could be prepared to jump on a fire before it gets out of hand? You said that with the Bobcat fire, only 2 fire engines could get up there into the area because of the narrow road. Is there any way to have helicopters ready to go in on 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes notice and dump water on a fire before it gets out of hand?
So good question, Don. So that is part of it. So the engines come in, that's part of our equation. So when there is a start like the Bobcat, they will divert both air attack, retardant, and helicopters if available. So one of the challenges we faced was when the Bobcat fire started, there were so many other fires on the landscape. So, and by the time you get a tanker in there, and it's Cogswell Dam, if you've probably been up that way, it's kind of a difficult area to get a retardant plane. Retardant planes are much more used on ridge lines. That's kind of where their good focus is. A helicopter can get in there, but it's getting it here too. So it's a balance of both. And it was just, where we were at in the overall fire scheme and how quickly it exploded. That was pretty, it really took off. Those 2 engines that were up there had fire around them, about 360 degrees around them. They were in a safe place because of all the, how Cogswell Dam is and stuff. But it was pretty, if it had been anywhere else, it would have been pretty dicey. So the fire really just took off 115 degrees, that dry. It was just amazing how quick it went. But we do, and the beauty of one of the things that we do have is, I need to recognize is we have what we call a mutual aid agreement with LA County Fire, which means that they come and help support us quickly. A lot of times right on the interface between public and private, but they can also come in and help us too. And they have quite a fleet of helicopters. So they were with us in Unified Command also while we fought the fire.
Okay, thanks.
So let me go through a few questions here. I'm not sure we'll get to them all, but we'll try. Brian Matsumoto, friend of ours from Nature for All. I didn't hear addressed a huge component of our wildfires, the causes. When people praise that wildfire is natural, but a huge number of our fires are man-caused, accidental, electrical, arson, etc. So my thought, Rick, would be that a sense that what causes us to go from the normal regime, one of the causes, to a regime where the fire returns too often is those causes. But what do you have to say, Rick?
Well, exactly. Nearly all the fires we have now are human caused. I mean, either somebody's welding something, or there's sparks coming off a catalytic converter, or somebody's actually clearing vegetation. That's why there's too many fires in Southern California. And I just want to add something to that. You know, you keep hearing about how horrible fire suppression is and these crazy firefighters putting out all these fires. There's zero toleration for fire in Southern California. I mean, the reason we put out fires is because they kill people and destroy communities. So, you know, we kind of speak out of two sides of our mouth. Well, fire suppression is horrible. It's building up all this vegetation, which actually isn't true in Southern California. And then we say, well, put out all the fires. So, you know, talk about getting stuck between a rock and a hard space. So, you know, essentially what we're dealing with here is ecologically, we've got a disaster because there's just too many fires. And fire suppression is really an important component of keeping those under control as best we can. But like Jerry said, I mean, you know, once these things start going, it's pretty difficult. If you can't catch them within the first 10, 20 acres, it's going to be a big fire, depending on where it is, of course. And if the wind starts blowing, it doesn't matter what's there. It's going to stop when it gets to the Pacific Ocean. So, you know, yeah, we're the problem. And so how we resolve that is a number of things: education, ignition prevention. But frankly, with climate change drying the landscape, I don't, so this is when I lose sleep at night, when I start thinking about these things.
Have anything quick to say, Jerry?
I think Rick did well. I mean, as I mentioned early on, we were getting about 20, 25 starts a week on the Angeles, and most are human cause. I mean, you know, here we were in extreme fire conditions, July 4th, telling people don't use fireworks, and they're just shooting them off left and right. I mean, you can only control human behavior so much. We ask folks, and 95% comply. There's that 5% that just, you know, it doesn't apply to me, or they just don't put one and one together in the same way other people do.
Yep.
So another one here from John Tobin, who I also know, who is a fisher among many other things. Is California, is the California Fish and Wildlife or the NF doing anything to relocate trout on the West Fork or assess the status of the fish? I know it's a fishing area that people use below Cogswell.
Yeah. So most of the focus is on more of the endangered species, so the chub and things like that. If they catch other things, they're going to put them in the North Fork. Same with the mountain yellow-legged frog and some of the other turtles and stuff. So that's where the energy's at, is really with more of the threatened and endangered species along the way. But, you know, trout, we can always reintroduce. Chubs, we don't have as much luck. So, so the CDFW is engaged with some of this work, as well as U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
So we have an unusual, thank you very much. We have an unusual question here from Danielle. Can you donate directly to the Forest Service rather than counting on Congress to do it? I'm sure there must be some nonprofit way someone could contribute, not probably directly to the Forest Service, but the Forest Foundation. What would you suggest?
So there are a couple things. There are some foundations for fallen firefighters along the way. There's National Forest Foundation. There's other organizations that you can contribute to. You just can't give it to us. We're a taxpayer-based organization. Right. And so there are NGOs out there that work closely with the Angeles, as well as other national forests that you may want to look at donating money and reaching out to them. So
Another one, quick one here. You mentioned the Lake Berryessa fire, and I think there's also a new wilderness area up there. Can you tell us more about the similarity between the Lake Berryessa fire and the Bobcat? I don't know, does Rick or do either of you know enough about that fire? I certainly don't.
Yeah, I mean, they're different systems. There's a lot of grasslands up there, oak woodlands, so it's a whole different system. Bobcat Fire, you had a lot of steep terrain, different habitat types. But, you know, my concern is for the shrublands up there that got reburned. And the pattern there is very similar to what we're seeing here in shrublands. So that was the concern. So in terms of an exact comparison, it's kind of hard to do because the terrain is so different.
I have a question here from a Suzanne, which I think, well, I'll read it. I'm confused by the disconnect between the idea of healthy so-called natural fire burns and the concept of global warming causing a new kind of extreme fire activity that is unlike anything we've seen in the past, neighborhoods being overrun that are not very close to wilderness, which is correct. Well, I think they're actually both correct, but either of you want to take that on, meaning that global warming is going to exacerbate the problem.
Yeah, so, you know, I think like I mentioned, we've always had big fires. The difference now is there's more people on the landscape lighting them. And combine that with climate change, it's making the landscape drier. So now you've got multiple ignitions everywhere, taking advantage of the wind sometimes. And then we have these lightning storms, which, you know, are not unusual historically, but you combine that up in the northern part of the state with the dry conditions, it's just incredible. So the thing that I really want to emphasize, these fires are because of dry vegetation, high temperatures, low humidity, and typically winds. We often want to blame the habitat, and I get a little concerned when all we ever talk about is fuel. It's actually nature. It's actually plant and animal life forms that are being, you know, referred to in that way. So the problem is, you know, you don't have these big fires in Michigan for a reason, in the forests up there, because it's too wet. Well, you take the water out and you'll have 100,000 acres in Michigan too. So it's really about the weather, and it's changing, unfortunately. And as I showed you in that graph, it looks like it's going to be getting hotter and more droughtier as the years go on, if the predictions are correct.
And by the way, we're getting a lot of thank yous to both of you gentlemen for a terrific program, which is a well-deserved comment. Last one, which is, this is the perversity of fire question. Don't fires as they get bigger contribute to global warming? By releasing.
Well, you know, yes, but this is going to sound really counterintuitive because a lot about fire really is. Yes, the smoke that's coming off, it's carbon-based material, it is contributing. You know, so what can we do about it? Well, we have to stop the ignitions. The sort of go-to solution right now is, well, let's get out there and clear some of this vegetation so we don't have these big fires. And then that assumes that that's going to stop the fires. And there's been a number of research projects that have looked at this, and they've actually found, if you look at the net carbon release of all that activity, grinding up vegetation, messing up the soil, actually the carbon release on those activities is actually slightly more than the fire itself. And that sounds really weird, but when you're talking about the diesel trucks that are moving this stuff around and the biomass they use to burn in supposedly clean incinerators, and then the removal of the plant material, and then the disruption of the ecosystem, it's kind of difficult to balance it out. But again, there's a lot of money involved in this, and so that sometimes colors the discussion.
Okay, there is one more question that I should ask, and this really one will be the last, from Derek Berlin. I believe the Pleasant View Ridge Wilderness Monitoring Report was to be completed in 2020. And some of us in the Sierra Club were involved in the establishment of the Pleasant View Ridge Wilderness. In fact, several people on this call helped map it. Let's see. So I don't know if Jerry knows if there's a monitoring report that was to be completed this year. There might well have been. And San Gabriel Wilderness in 2021. How will the Bobcat Fire's heavy activity in this area affect those efforts? So I guess the question would be the Pleasant View Ridge Wilderness, obviously part of that was burned because it goes right down the Juniper Hills. So did you affect the wilderness? Did the wilderness affect you? Are there reports coming up that will, I know of monitoring reports, I just don't know of those specific ones. Maybe you don't either, but.
Not at this juncture, right? Like you said, I know Pleasant View got came right through there, and then into Valermo along the way. So we do have what we call our BEAR teams, burnt areas emergency response teams, taking a look at those areas of what kind of work needs to be done. We did have an incursion by a bulldozer, so we're taking care of that along the way, because that was unfortunate, but we addressed it as quickly as we could once we found out about it. So it's
in wilderness, heavy equipment's allowed if you need to.
Yeah, and that one we didn't, it had not been given permission. It just, someone thought it was did not understand the separation between wilderness and all that, but we will be repairing that piece of it as it relates to any future monitoring. That we would sure look towards Sierra Club and other groups to help us. My staffing will be pretty focused on a lot of other pieces of the fire for the next 2 years. And that's just, we're limited. It is what it is. And so we have to kind of put our folks where they need to be. And so it's just a limited staff. And so we do recognize the contribution of Sierra Club and many other volunteer groups, as well as our partners who help us get this work done along the way.
Well, thank you. And I know that we do trail work on, helps direct some trail work, and other people on this call that I know do trail work and would be, I know, more than willing to help. I would like to thank both Rick Halsey and Jerry Perez for an outstanding program, and come back, I think it's January 27th. We'll be getting information out to you all. Sign up on Facebook for more information at Sierra Club Forest Committee. And even though it's going to be a silent round of applause, let's give them a round of applause. That was a terrific program, guys.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you all. I'm going to exit now.